Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and today I'm going to show the 13th game of the book called Chess, The Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. The game was played between Ponomariov and Conquest in Torshavn in 2000. The opening played was CaroKann Defence. From this game we will learn several key principles that reflect the game's strategic and tactical elements while emphasizing the importance of king safety and center control. So without further ado, let's start. So it started with e4, occupying the center with one of his central pawns. c6, the CaroKann defense. In this strategy, the player controlling the black pieces wants to challenge the white player's important e4 pawn. And they want to do this without wasting time by moving their queen early in the game, like in some other strategies, or by blocking their bishop, like in the French strategy. So the CaroKann strategy is very safe and stable, but like any strategy, it has its disadvantages. In this case, it might not be great for the knight that belongs to the black queen because of a pawn move that takes away its natural spot on c6. Now white played d4. By putting a second pawn on the fourth rank, white achieves maximum freedom of movement for his minor pieces. d5. Black releases his queen's bishop and prepares to break up white's center. Knight c3. White likes to keep the chessboard more open instead of closing it up by moving the pawn to e5, which would lead to a slower and more strategic game. This choice depends on the player's personal style because both options give white a small advantage but in different ways. More control over the board with e5 or more active and dynamic piece movement in the current game, which is knight to c3. D takes e4. Black needs to trade pawns before putting their pieces into action because if they play knight f6, white's response with e5 would create an uncomfortable situation. Knight takes e4. So after d takes a4, knight takes e4. A knight prefers to stay in the center of the board where it's safe from pawn attacks. Here the only way to move the knight with a pawn would be to play f5. But that move would create weaknesses actually on e6 and e5, which isn't good for black. Bishop to f5 develops and attacks the knight. Knight to g3. The knight has to retreat and does so in the most time efficient way by harassing the black bishop. Now black played bishop g6. The bishop stays on the more active diagonal and keeps out of the way of the other pieces. h4. It looks like white is not paying much attention to the center and is making it difficult for the king to find a safe spot on the king side later on. The reason is that black isn't putting any immediate pressure on the center. So white can be a bit more daring with their moves. So white decides to advance on the king side and threaten h5, which causes some problems for the black bishop. Eventually, white's king can move to the queen side for safety. Black played h6. Black creates a safe space for the bishop to escape to because if they didn't, white's h5 move would be troublesome. So if black had played h5 instead, then white could play knight 1e2 with the idea of knight f4 to attack the bishop and the h pawn for the third time with the knight, queen and this knight, which would be quite uncomfortable for black. So black played h6. After h6, knight f3. White had the option to play h5 immediately, but wisely chose to keep the possibility of pressuring the bishop with knight e5 and also h5 on the next turn. Now black played knight f6. Another choice for black was to play knight d7 to stop white's upcoming move. In this case, after h5, bishop h7, bishop d3, Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop. Now white would have a slight advantage. White could then finish developing their pieces with bishop d2 and then queenside castle. So after knight f3, here black played knight f6 instead of knight d7. Knight e5. The knight takes the chance to seize a strong central square. Bishop h7. A necessary retreat, as black cannot tolerate his kingside pawns be smashed up after, let's say, nb d7, then knight takes bishop, and then pawn takes knight, which would break up the pawn structure. So black played bishop h7, bishop d3. Many players would automatically play bishop to c4, which is a strong move that develops a piece and threatens checkmate on f7. However, the situation is not entirely clear after e6, as black can potentially use the d5 square later, and the knight in the center can easily be moved by pushing the c2 pawn to c4 because white's bishop is in the way. So after bishop d3, if black plays knight to d5, white can push the knight away by playing c4. But if white plays bishop c4, white doesn't have that option. So after bishop d3, here white opts for a different approach that continues to pressure on the black bishop on h7. Bishop takes bishop. If queen takes d4 here, then knight takes f7, king takes f7, and then bishop g6 check would cost black his queen to the discovered check. A possible continuation after knight takes f7 would be bishop takes d3. In that case, knight takes rook, queen e5 check, bishop e3. And then bishop h7. Apparently the knight is trapped on h8, but white has a good move right now. Queen d8 check, king takes queen, knight f7 check, king e8, and knight takes the queen. And white emerges the safe exchange up. So after bishop d3, now black played bishop takes d3. Queen takes d3, white regains his piece and moves one step closer to castling queenside. e6. Even though black spent extra time moving their light squared bishop, they're happy to have traded it. If they hadn't, their pawns would have blocked its movement. Bishop f4. The bishop is positioned well to support the knight in the center. Now white is prepared to castle on the queen side. So conquest, black disrupt this by playing queen a5 check. So in chess, it's best to use checks when they serve a purpose, like leading to checkmate. Black keeps the queen on a5 to make it difficult for white to safely castle kingside, as doing so would result in losing the pawn on a2 to the black queen. By the way, white cannot castle right away because of the check. So here white played c3. White is faced with a dilemma about how to defend against the check when they play bishop d2. Then queen c7. They haven't really saved any time because the black queen is better on c7 than on d8. Essentially, they have placed their bishop on a square where it has fewer options that it would on f4. Additionally, this move c3, the main move, has some downsides because the white king will have a somewhat less protected pawn structure after castling because the pawn has already pushed. Queen a6. So after c3, black played queen a6, as he has less space, and is slightly behind in development. Black decides that swapping queens will ease his positions. So knight e4. White agrees to trade queens, but with a strategic advantage. They plan to remove their poorly positioned knight on g3 and force their opponent to have doubled pawns. Knight takes e4. Black decides not to trade queens because he thinks the cost is too great. Because here, instead of knight e4, white was threatening to capture the knight, which would create a doubled pawn. Anyway, knight takes e4, and then instead of knight takes e4, if black captures the queen, then knight takes, g takes, and knight takes the queen. Now his king side is taken some minor damage. However, this was still a better choice for black actually, as the middle part of the game becomes more challenging for the black king when both sides still have queens on the board. So knight takes e4, queen takes e4. White's queen is now in an excellent central position and can be a key part of white's plans. Meanwhile, the black queen prevents white from castling on the king side, and actually on the queen side as well, because if white castles on the queen side, queen will capture the pawn. However, the black queen is not well placed in the center like the white queen. Now black played knight d7. This move gives up the ability to castle, but it was necessary for black to find a way to develop their pieces. Leaving the knight on e5 unchallenged for too long wouldn't have been a good idea. So knight took the knight, king took the knight, and then rook h3. Because white has more space on the board, they can move their rook to a strong central attacking position using this h3 square. Black can't do the same because their pawns are too far back and won't allow for such a move. Rook c8. Now black is desperate to develop his king side, but if bishop e7 immediately, then queen e5 with the ideas of both queen takes g7 and queen c7 check is troublesome. So black played rook c8, bishop e5. So here, if black plays bishop e7 right now, then bishop takes g7 would capture a pawn. Ponomariov, white, will only allow his opponent to develop the bishop if they weaken their center with f6. Part of a successful strategy in chess is to make sure your opponent can't make strong moves unless they pay a price for it. But after bishop e5, black played queen c4. Black decides to move his queen to a position where it can be involved in the center, from where the queen can help in defending the e6 square. After some necessary weakening moves. Rook f3, a good move by white. White's plan can be simplified into 4 stages. Force black to weaken the defense of e6 with f7 to f6. Align all major pieces against e6 and break through by capturing on e6, delivering checkmate to the vulnerable black king. Now black played f6. Alas, black cannot maintain his pawns in a compact formation, as here is what would have happened if black had played king e8 instead. Then queen f4, f6, bishop takes pawn, pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn on f6, and white wins the rook in the corner after either rook h7, then queen g6 check, double attack, or rook g8, then also queen f7 check. So black had to play f6, white played bishop g3, move the bishop away from the attack, f5. The threat of queen g6. White was threatening to play queen g6, which can advance to f7 through the weak square on g6. Makes black give up the control of the e5 square. So this f5 move is giving up the control of the e5 square. But black had to play. Okay, so if white had played queen f4 right now, white played queen c2. Actually, the queen retires to a safe distance, as very embarrassing would be queen f4 because of g5. If pawn takes pawn, then pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, and rook h1 check, and black wins a rook. So white played queen c2, black played g5. Black tries to divert white's attention from a focused attack on e6 by making a pawn demonstration on the king side. The immediate threat is f4, which would trap the white bishop and limit its mobility. So white played bishop e5. This stops black's plan by attacking the rook and preventing them from gaining an advantage. Rook g8. Sadly for black, the rook has to leave the h file, because if rook h7, then rook takes f5, e takes f5, queen takes f5, check, captures the rook and also gains 2 extra pawns. So after rook g8, b3. White's winning plan starts to come together. Initially, they aim to force the black queen away from defending the e6 square. Queen d5. The ideal square for the queen, but alas, she cannot stay. She can only stay here for one move because of c4. This pawn move accomplishes two things. It pushes the queen away out of the center and also sets the stage for a potential d5 move to break down the black king's defenses. Queen f5 check. The queen must go and back to the rook's file because exchanging queens doesn't help. If black plays queen e4 check, then queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, and rook f7 check. Their pawns are in bad shape, and the white rook dominates the 7th rank. So black played queen a5 check, king f1. The white king is safe on f1 and also guards the g2. So if black dares to play g takes h4, there won't be any problem. Bishop e7. If black plays g takes h4, then rook takes f5 is a powerful move. Because if pawn takes a rook, queen takes pawn, king d8, or else the rook on c8 will be captured. Bishop f6 check wins the black queen through a discovered attack. However, black now poses a threat with g4. After bishop e7, black is trying to play g4. Now white played h takes g5. This move disrupts black's progress on the king side because of if h takes g5, then rook h3 leaves white with undisputed control of the h file. Generally, the player with the superior minor piece often wins the battle for an open file. Here, the presence of the white bishop blocking the h8 square prevents the black rooks from contesting it. So, after bishop e7, h takes g5, and now black played rook takes g5. Also, one more thing here, when black was trying, black played bishop e7, he was planning to play g4 followed by bishop takes h4, and their counter attack gains momentum. So h takes g5, rook takes g5. Instead of giving up the h file, black opts to exert direct pressure on g2 with their rooks. Nevertheless, white discovers that managing black's counterplay is much more manageable without a large group of advancing black pawns. Rook d1. So white eventually develops his queen's rook, and in doing so, he sidesteps the potential trap of rook e1. If rook e1, that's a bad move. Rook takes g2, king takes g2, queen takes e1, which would have required him to figure out how to salvage the king. So rook d1, now h5. Black is getting ready to attack the white king side with h4, but they don't want to play rook cg8 right away. If they did, then white responded with g3. Black would have to deal with the threat of d5, which would disrupt their center. By keeping the rook on c8, for now, black can respond to d5 with c takes d5, and white can capture the pawn on c4. White cannot capture the pawn because there is a pin on c4. So here white played queen e2. White is finally ready to utilize the strength of his powerful pieces, the queen and the rooks, to target vulnerable pawn on e6. White holds just one advantage in this position, but it's a significant one, the precarious position of the black king. If black's king were safely tucked away on a8, they would have no reason to worry. Now, queen a7. Black's chances of mounting a stronger counterattack on the king side would improve significantly if they could get their queen there, potentially even turning the game around. Unfortunately, this remains a distant hope. For instance, if black were to play queen d8, then d5 would be a decisive move. the seemingly awkward move queen a6 is aimed at countering d5. So here, if white plays d5, then c takes d5, queen c takes d5, queen takes e2 check would be a favorable outcome for black. So after queen a6, bishop f4. The most efficient move clears the path to e6 and saves time. Rook g6. Naturally, the rook retreats to a square where it guards the e6 pawn. Rook e3. White's plan nears completion as once he plays rook d e1, the defense on e6 will be at melting point. Rook cg8. The only hope is a counterattack along the g file. g3. Simple defense, hold the black rooks at bay long enough for decisive action to take place on the e file. h4. Black's final attempt. Rook e1. At first, black's attack appears strong, especially with the aid of the h4 pawn against g3, but there is a critical difference giving white a decisive edge. White has an active queen in the midst of the action on the e file, while black's queen sits inactively on a6. This leads to black's rapid downfall. Bishop d4, attacking the rook on e1. Now rook takes e6, the brilliant outcome of white's carefully planned strategy. Bishop takes e1. In situation like this, your only option is to capture pieces and wish that your opponent mishandles their attack. So rook e7 check, king d8, because if king c8, then rook e8 check, rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and it's a checkmate. If king d7, then queen e7 is a checkmate. So king d8, now bishop c7 check. The black king is gradually pursued with which may appear to be lengthy procedure. However, it's essential to note that black's choices are highly restricted, simplifying the calculation that white needed to consider before opting for rook takes e6. So king c8, queen e5. This is a powerful move, bringing the piece to the center of the board and immediately threatening queen takes f5 check with a checkmate to follow on the next move. Now, additionally, the white queen quietly positions itself to potentially deliver a checkmate on c7 once the square is occupied by the unoccupied by the bishop. Pawn to b5. The black king needs heir. Bishop d8. By making a seeming sacrifice of the bishop, it guarantees that the black king can't escape to b7 because of the rook. Now, black played bishop a5. The only reasonable attempt to defend the dark squares, because if king takes bishop, queen c7 checkmate. If rook takes bishop, queen c7 checkmate. So bishop a5. Now white played rook c7 check. King b8. And then if instead bishop takes rook, then queen takes c7 checkmate. So after king b8, rook takes c6 check. Black resigned because the queen was about to be captured. It's interesting to note that Ponomariov's dismantling of the Caro-Kann defense ends with the removal of the pawn on c6. So key lessons and principles to take away from this game: piece development, pawn structure, king safety, open files, piece activity, timing and tactics, queen activity, and endgame technique. You can pause the video and look for these principles. I hope you like this video and learn something from this video as well. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and share and subscribe to my channel to show some support. Thank you.